On July 21st, 2019, an event happened in Hong Kong that absolutely shattered public trust in law and order. It's known as the Yuen Long 721 incident. Today, we're going to break down what happened that night, how the official story got completely rewritten, and what it all tells us about the state of justice in the city today. So, let's dive right in. It really all comes down to this one number. 39. 39 minutes, that is how long it took for police to show up in force while a violent mob was attacking people at a busy train station. All while thousands, and I mean thousands, of desperate calls for help were flooding the emergency lines. The single number became this incredibly powerful symbol of a system that felt like it was failing its own citizens. So, to really get a grip on the massive fallout from this, we've got to go back to that night. We need to look at the raw, unfiltered facts of the attack itself. Okay, so picture the scene. It's the Yuen Long MTR station, late in the evening. Suddenly, hundreds of men, all dressed in white shirts, a lot of them suspected of having ties to triad gangs, just descend on the area. And look, they weren't there to protest. They came armed, and they came ready for a fight. This timeline really just lays the whole crisis bare. Okay, so at 10:40 p.m., the attacks start. Just 12 minutes later, two officers show up, but then they leave almost immediately, saying they were outnumbered and didn't have the right gear. The main police force, they don't arrive until around 11:20. That's the critical 39-minute gap we're talking about. And even then, it wasn't over. The attackers came back for a second wave after midnight. In this attack, it was just brutal and totally indiscriminate. I mean, yeah, the mob seemed to be targeting people dressed in black, the color of the pro-democracy movement, but really, they attacked anyone who got in their way. We're talking ordinary commuters, journalists trying to do their job, a pregnant woman, and even a pro-democracy lawmaker named Lam Chuk-ting. And they were using weapons like wooden sticks and metal rods. You know, as all this chaos was happening, people did exactly what you're supposed to do. They called for help. The 999 emergency hotline was just hammered with over 24,000 calls. Can you imagine? People were trapped, they were terrified, and they were pleading for a police response that just wasn't coming. And the human cost was very real. At least 45 people ended up injured, many of them with serious wounds from the beatings. This incident didn't just spark fear. It immediately sparked these huge accusations of collusion, that the attackers, the police, and pro-Beijing figures were somehow working together. And these accusations were fueled by some pretty shocking footage of a pro-Beijing lawmaker shaking hands with some of the men in white earlier that evening. For many people, that was all the proof they needed. So, with all this video evidence, thousands of eyewitnesses, you would think the line between who was an attacker and who was a victim was crystal clear, right? Well, what happened next in the courts is where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. The legal aftermath of this attack was, to put it mildly, a stunning reversal. The official story started to change, and pretty soon, the victims themselves were the ones in the courtroom, on trial. And you can see the shift right here. What was seen by pretty much everyone as an indiscriminate mob attacking commuters was later officially reframed by the police and by prosecutors as a clash, or a gang fight. Now that new language implies that both sides were equally at fault, the armed mob and the people they were attacking. And honestly, nothing captures this flip-flop better than the case of that lawmaker, Lam Chuk-ting. I mean, look at this. He goes from being beaten so badly he's hospitalized, and even getting a letter of thanks from the police, to then being convicted of rioting for what he did on that exact same night. It's unbelievable. So you're probably asking, how on earth did that happen? Well, the prosecution's argument was that Lam and the others weren't defending themselves. They were provoking the mob, things like shouting back or using a fire hose to try and create a barrier. Those actions were reinterpreted as acts of rioting, and that, of course, fit perfectly with this new clash narrative. So you end up with this really strange, almost funhouse mirror version of justice. Yes, some of the guys in white shirts were convicted, but at the same time, an investigative journalist who actually exposed who some of them were got prosecuted. And most critically, victims who tried to defend themselves were also convicted of rioting. It just completely blurred the moral and legal lines of the entire event. In all of this, it just raises a much, much bigger question. When the legal system can be used to reshape the public's memory of a single well-documented event, what does that say about the rule of law itself? And this, right here, is the long-term fallout. The 721 incident and everything that happened in the courts afterward has become a key piece of evidence in the debate over whether judicial independence in Hong Kong is eroding. So let's just be super clear about what's at stake here. Judicial independence is this core idea that courts should be impartial, that they should be free from political pressure. For decades, this was the absolute bedrock of Hong Kong's success as a global financial center. But now, critics are pointing to a whole bunch of signs that this principle is wearing thin. They talk about courts seeming to side with the government more often in politically charged cases, like 721. They point to esteemed foreign judges actually resigning from the city's top court, the political pressure from the Patriots administering Hong Kong principle, and, of course, the huge national security law, which has just fundamentally changed the legal game. And here is why this is such a big deal on a global scale. This perceived erosion, it directly challenges the high degree of autonomy that was promised to Hong Kong under the one country, two systems framework. That's the very foundation of its special status in the world. So when you boil it all down, for a lot of people watching this, the 721 verdicts aren't just about one night of violence anymore. They see it as part of a much bigger effort to use the courts to create an official, state-approved version of history for the 2019 protests, a version that downplays pro-government violence and criminalizes any form of dissent. Which brings us to our final and most critical question. The Yuen Long incident started as a story about police inaction, but it's become a story about the law itself, and it forces us all to ask, when the courts become a tool to cement an official story, what's actually left of the rule of law?